Hey, and welcome to That Fabric Guide. Today we are going to look at how we can use variable libraries inside Microsoft Fabric. And we're going to use them in order to easily switch variables between the different environments. So when you go from dev to test to prod, you might want to change out some variables such as what environment am I in, or what is the connection to my database, or which semantic model should I refresh, or shall I skip a part of my notebook if I'm on the dev environment. All of these use cases can be solved by variable libraries, and today we're going to look at them, so let's head over to my laptop and see what it's all about. Okay, so here we are in my That Fabric Guy Fabric environment on my laptop. Let me zoom in a little bit so that the screen share is readable. And I've created a very small sample environment here, which shows just a notebook. It's called varlib examples, and in here we are trying to read from a variable library called tfg varlib. And then we're going, And then we're going to read a variable that's called testInt or integer and then print it. However, we get an error because we are simply not using a variable library in this workspace. So let's first create a variable library and then we can show how that all works. So let's go to the varlib folder here. We click new item. Go to all items and search for var. We get variable library, and let's call this tfg varlib. And create. And now it's just as easy as putting these things in here. And now we have a variable library, so that's really cool. Let's start with creating new variables. And let's say we create testInt. That's the name of the variable. We can then put a data type in here, and let's say this is an integer, and the default value in our default value set is 1 to 3. We're going to scroll over to the right in this case, and we're going to add a value set. We're going to call this value set production. And in production, I want my variable to be 987, just another random number. Let's go to settings. No, let's not go to settings. This is fine. And there we go, it's now saved. Now if we go back to our example here, we can run the notebook and it will print 1 to 3 because that's the number that we've put in. So now if we want to show this number on a different environment, on a different workspace, for example, after deploying to production, we want to use the same code but get a different value. And let's do that. So we go back to our workspace. That's production one. I was looking for this one. We go to deployment pipeline and we're going to do a compare, then look for the flat list. And then there are a lot of items, and let's filter for variable library because that's the one that I want to deploy. And let's look for, where is it? Let's look for notebooks as well. And then filter for only in source. And then still there are way too many in here, but when we zoom out a little bit, I can probably see where they are. We should search for var like so. Well, let's deploy the notebook and the variable library. This should be done fairly quickly. Now the content has been copied to production. So when we go to That Fabric Guy production workspace, we can find our variable library folder in here with the library and the examples. Now there's one thing we need to do. We need to go into the variable library and we need to set the production one as active. So let's set this one as active. Save. We agree. And from now on, we do not touch anymore this variable library, because if we do, we might mess up the values that we have in here. So here we are. Let's just use this to navigate to production. Let's go to varlib. Let's open the notebook with the examples. And let's start up this example. There we are. Session started in 5 seconds. That's really nice. And we should be getting a number now reading 987. And there we are. We did not change anything in the code, but we now are looking at our production values. So this is very useful. And what I usually do in my variable libraries, I do not have test integer or whatever. I usually put in a variable that's called environment. And that's a string. and it will say dev, and here it will say prod, like so. We agree. And in our notebook, we can then say, do things, x equals 1, if we can do things like this, where we can skip code or only execute code if we are in a certain environment. This can be very handy if you want to do loading of data on environments that you want to schedule every day, but you want to load certain pieces on a certain environment only once a week, for example. If you want to do maintenance on a daily basis on production, on a weekly basis in development, then these are typical things that you can do like so. Now, another great use of using the the variable libraries is by putting in key vault names. So I can imagine that we have key vault names or secret names that point to my ERP password or API key for UAT and for production with separate keys, all right? However, in my code, I want to make sure that we get only one key. So when using notebook utils get secrets, we want to get a secret from either a dev version or UAT version or production version of the key vault, or we want in the singular key vault that we have, if that is the case, we want to be picking a dev secret or UAT secret or a production secret. So that is something we can drive from Python or from our PySpark notebooks in here, like I just demoed with the test integer variable. You can think of other use cases, but just know that you can request a variable library object like so, and then you can get the value of a variable inside that active environment in order to drive the code in your notebook. So this can be very, very useful. All right, now let's look at how we can make things a little bit more interesting. So when we go to connections and we create a new connection, and let's say we create a connection, now let's say it's a SQL Server connection that we're creating, and it's dev.servername.com, database name here, the SQL dev. All right, so we've now created username admin. We've now created a connection to SQL dev with a server name of dev.servername.com, and the database is called database name here. We will create a second connection that will show prod.servername.com, right? So we now have two connections, and those connections have a connection ID. What we can do, what I'm going to show you, is not like this, because I don't have that example here. But what we actually can show is, discard these changes please, is how we can use, for example, these two SQL Server connections that we have to Azure SQL databases. So we're going to create in our in our varlib, we're going to create a pipeline, and we call this varlib pipeline examples. There we go. We put in a pipeline activity and we put in copy data because we want to read data from the SQL Server into our lakehouse. Now, we need to create a connection here, and the connection could be, I don't know, the WWI operational connection. And this is an Azure SQL connection to a database, a table, or a query, or select star from dbo.users. I don't know. This failed now because I think I need to re-authenticate or something like that. It doesn't matter for now. The thing I'm going to show you is something different. So we click outside of the copy data. We go to library variables and we click new. From here, it will find the variables that we have defined in our workspace, and we will simply select the workspace that we want to add. And we do that for both. It doesn't matter. We do that for the environments that we want to put in. Now, what we can do is we can go over to, we go to settings and then to connections. We go here and then to settings of the connection, and we pick the connection ID. We go back into the pipeline And in here, under connection, we click on the cross and we say use dynamic content. Then from there, we can start looking for functions. For example, logical functions such as if and equals. So we say if two values are the same. What two values are the same? Well, my library variable environment should be the same as the text dev. I think no, it should be here. Like so. Why is this throwing errors? This is why it was throwing errors. Let's save that for now. Go back to the settings. We can do this from here, manage connections, and pick the second SQL Server settings, connection ID, and indeed these are not active anymore. We can go back here and then we can, for the else branch of this if statement, we can put in the secondary connection ID. Now we do that like so, and now what what's going to happen is once the environment is set to dev, so on the development side of things, the connection is set to dev, and then the if statement here will resolve to a connection ID that we use for our dev SQL Server instead of our production SQL Server. The same thing will work when you just click on the connection and you swap the connections between the two servers. However, you cannot do that from the UI if you are doing automated deployments. Now, using variable libraries, we can now do an automatic deployment, and then at runtime, the system will check what is my current environment, what is the value that I need. An alternative solution here would be to put these connection IDs in the variable library itself and then just refer to this environment variable in our dynamic content for the connection. But then again, this is just an example of how we can use the variable libraries for automated deployments and, for example, swapping out connections to SQL Server, to Key Vault, to the semantic models, and so on. You can think of probably quite a few ways that you can use this. And if you do, I'm very curious to how you are using variable libraries and if you are using variable libraries at all. I'm also curious, and I want you to let me know in the comments down below here, if you want anything else added to variable libraries. So is there a feature that you really want to see? For me, one thing is I would like a global variable library that I can refer from multiple workspaces. That would be incredibly cool, because then you don't have to deploy your variable library. You can just put in your variables like so. Another thing I would really like is having secret values in the variable library. A bit like Azure DevOps can contain secret variables, because then we can put passwords and API keys and so in the variable library, and we don't need to use an external key vault anymore. Now, I understand Key Vault is very cheap, it's very easy to work with, and with notebook utils and so from Fabric you have a very easy integration path. However, for some data teams it is very difficult to create key vaults or to get access to existing key vaults. So having a way to manage secrets inside Microsoft Fabric natively would be awesome, and I think variable libraries would be a good way to support that. If you have any other things that you would like to see, know, or ask Microsoft, put it in the comments down below. I'm not working for Microsoft. I'm just trying to collect your information, because as a consultant, I'm always interested in seeing what other people are doing. Now, if you like this video, please hit like, press the thumbs up, and subscribe to my channel. Subscribing is the way that I grow my channel, and that makes it possible for me to be here every single week teaching you things in Microsoft Fabric and Power BI. So please subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you next week. Ciao, ciao.